Hello everyone, continuing where we last left off, please remember to like, share, comment, subscribe, and all that fun stuff for me as it does help my channel grow. Chapter 4, 364 Days Till Halloween. Long after Jack disappeared, long after Jack descended Spiral Hill and disappeared into the woods, Sally wandered the cemetery alone to think about what she'd heard. This unbelievable as it was, to think that Jack, the Pumpkin King, felt trapped in their town. It made her realize just how badly she, too, longed for something more. Screams were all well and good, but what about love, companionship? All she had ever known was Dr. Finkelstein's cold possessiveness. She sunk to her knees at the far end of the cemetery, amid the swampy grass where few other monsters went. Months earlier, she had been wandering there and stumbled upon a spree of wild nightshade. Ever since, even since whenever she'd been able to slip away from her creator, she had returned to the herb patch and carefully tended to it. She'd even collected extra seeds from the witch sisters, who were careless with their potions and tossed their extra ingredients into the ditch outside their cottage. Now Sally had a poison garden bursting with herbants and hazel, and a thriving crop of deadly nightshade. With her one remaining, with her one remaining hand, she plucked a few leaves from the nightshade and carefully tucked them into her dress. She sighed to herself, pressing a hand where her missing arm should be, as she looked towards the forest one more time and thought of Jack. One day, she thought, maybe we'll both be free, but sadly that day was not today. Sally tried to be silent as possible as she snuck back into Finkelstein's castle. Shoes made a soft Luckily, shoes made of soft cotton made it easier to be quiet. The castle lanterns had been set low, and she hoped her creator was already in bed, fast asleep. She crept to the cupboard and hunted through the jars for the one labeled Deadly Nightshade and quickly stuffed in the herbs she'd harvested from her garden. She was finishing when she heard the whine of Dr. Finkelstein's wheelchair. She crammed the lid to the jar and shoved it back into the cupboard as lantern light flickered at the top of the long stone ramp that led to the top of the castle. Dr. Finkelstein rolled down to the bottom of the ramp. Sally, the doctor's sharp voice pinned her to the wall. You came back. She glanced over her shoulder at the cupboard, hoping he hadn't seen which jar she'd been holding. I had to, she said softly, blinking her dull eyes. He gave a cold grin and pulled his thin lips back over his small teeth. For this, he held up her right arm. It looked sad and alone, just string and stuffing, and she felt guilty for having left it behind. The dismembered hand gave her a small sorrowful wave. Yes, she admitted. The doctor laughed triumphantly. there was a reason. He'd made Sally out of rags. His other creations were fearsome things, robots, and reanimated corpses. They did his bidding, but they were brainless, heartless. He had made Sally because he had longed for someone to smile at him, to delight in cooking for him, to brighten up the lone castle, but he'd made some misjudgment in her creation. He meant to make her soft through and through, but there was still something undoubtedly hard inside her, like a wooden button lodged in a sweater. Like a button lodged in a sweater. Shall we then? The doctor mentioned to the long, curving ramp that led up to the castle's workroom. Sighing, she started up the ramp. Her feet tried to object. They wanted to tear themselves off her body and run away back to the party in the town square or wander through the woods with Jack. But she forced them to obey. Dr. Finkelstein held up the lantern to light their way, followed her in his chair. The doctor's laboratory, which sat atop the castle's tower, had been built in the shape of a giant cauldron. It had always reminded Sally of the witches. It always reminded Sally of the doctor's head, hard and round, and riveted together with iron, with the inside reserved for brilliant but cruel work. In the laboratory, a disembodied hand floated in a clear jar of preservatives. Chemicals bubbled up from beakers as part of countless experiments. Sally glanced over the equipment with a chill. She hated the room with its cold walls and smell of sulfur. This was the room where she'd come to life, slowly gaining consciousness out of the shadowy dark, blinking. Open her eyes. Dr. Finkelstein strapped her back down onto the table with leather binds, then threaded his needle. This is twice this month you've slipped deadly nightshade into my tea and run off, he said as he painstakingly reattached her arm with the thread. She smiled in proud defiance 3 times. He growled in annoyance, thrusting the needle dangerously close to her eye. You're mine, you know. I made you with my own hands. She sighed as she gazed out of the rafters. She gazed with it. Okay. You can make other creations, she reasoned with him. I'm restless. I can't help it. For a moment, Dr. Finkelstein felt fatherly pity for her. He knew that she was a lonely life, taking care of an old man in a wheelchair. He never much cared for the frenetic revelries of town, but he could see how a young and naive creature like Sally would be drawn to the festivities. She would learn all his creations learned in time. It's a phase, my dear, he said with a slightly more sympathetic then bit off thread as he finished attaching her arm. Oh, slightly more sympathy, then bit off the thread and finished as he finished attaching her arm. It'll pass. We need to be patient, that's all. But I don't want to be patient as the observatory roof cracked open with a rumble of machinery. Sally turned to look out at the starless sky over the woods. Was Jack out there now? Did he feel... Oh, did he still feel the same way? So lost. At least she thought. I refilled the jar of nightshade. The hinterland forest was a bleak, empty place. No leaves grew on the twisting trees. No grass crushed underfoot. There were no small animals to pounce on or bats overhead. And yet Jack found himself wandering deeper and deeper, farther than he ever had before. The sound of the town died behind him until he could finally hear nothing but his own thoughts. He was greatly troubled by the growing feeling of discontentment. For the past few months, he'd been able to dismiss it. He told himself it was just overworked, or maybe he'd eaten rancid meat when really a skeleton shouldn't eat anything at all. He threw himself into Halloween preparations and pushed away those nagging feelings that something was wrong, something was empty. But now, with the holiday here and gone, there was nothing left to distract him with. A light was shining brightly on those nagging thoughts, and he couldn't scare them back into the shadows. Zero barked wanting to play fetch. Not now, Zero, Jack said. I'm not in the mood. Let me be boiled to death with melancholy, he thought morosely. That old ghoulish Shakespeare should know how to put those feelings into words. The ghost dog panted persistently, continuing to hover around him, and Jack relented. All right, here you go. He broke off one of his rib bones and tossed it deep into the shadows. Zero found the bone in a hollowed-out tree trunk and snatched it up happily. Wolf. Hours passed as Jack and Zero continued meandering through the forest. Jack clenched his skull with his thin fingers. He'd never gotten much thought to the Hinterwoods, usually so empty and silent, but now he felt a whisper of magic. A curious wind rustled rustled his bat bow tie. Hazy morning light rose in the east. He had really walked so far. Soon the sun grinned cruelly down on them like a jack-o'-lantern. Jack yawned, blinking into the light, and asked, Where are we? That deep into the hinterlands, the trees weren't gnarled and twisted as they had been at the edge of the forest where Halloween Town ended. The sun cast a strange, slanted light between the trees. The ground hummed with a promise of something different. The wind beckoned them towards a circular ring of trees. He sniffed the air Was that the scent of candy? It's someplace new. Jack realized with the stringing of interest. Zero suddenly hung back, barking a low, wondering, as though he sensed possible danger amid the trees, but Jack ignored the dog. What is this? Jack marveled. Several trees stood like sentinels around the perimeter of the clearing. Someone or something had carved bizarre but beautiful shapes into their trunks. The wind whispered secrets of old, making goosebumps erupt on his cold bones. The carvings were strange and colorful, almost like symbols, but symbols of what? He touched his fingers to his chin, considering one of the trees had a green four-leafed clover painted. Another showed a heart through. This heart wasn't profusely pulsating and spewing blood like the kind Jack was most familiar with. It seemed sweet. And there was that an egg decorated festively with soft blue and yellow and pink, the colors of spring. How how peculiar. Next to it was a carving of a fat brown bird that made his mouth water. For some strange reason, the wind shifted, tasting of gravy. Odd. Jack turned in a slow semicircle in the clearing. Zero barked uneasy again, but Jack was too entranced to notice the dog's hesitation. Golden light, a color he'd never seen before, fluttered in through the trees. He felt a tingle throughout his body that he hadn't felt in decades. Life returning to his bones, a delicious curiosity he'd lost somewhere somehow. What this how whatever this was, it definitely wasn't Halloween Town. He gasped as he glanced off on the final tree. A whitish trunk with was carved with a fantastical symbol unlike anything else he'd ever seen. It appeared to be a bushy evergreen decorated with colorful balls of red and white striped candy canes and a star atop it. There were even little people-shaped cookies that smelled like cinnamon. Jack had never seen anything like this. So shiny, so sparkly, so jolly. What did it mean? What were those colorful balls and those little cookie men? And the wrapped boxes tied with bows at the base of the tree. Entranced, Jack drifted towards the magical door with the wind at his back. Delighted, he realized that one of the colorful balls wasn't a ball at all, but a knob. Its shiny brass reflected his own grinning skeleton skull. Before he knew what he was doing, he reached out to the knob, his bones quaking with excitement. He never experienced anything like this. The ball turned in his hand and opened a door. A realization struck him with delight. The carvings were secret doors. Oh, what magical creatures had done this, and why? And where did the door lead? As he peered through the newly opened door, his jawbone dropped in wonder. But behind him, Zero hovered anxiously. A frosty breeze twirled up from within the tree. The space inside the tree was dark, but seemed somehow alive. Jack heard the tinkling of distant bells. The sound enticed him forward into the darkness. Zero growled at the strange and strong wind that carried the smell of freshly fallen snow. Jack turned back towards his dog, concerned, but the wind had other ideas. It grew powerful enough to pull Jack back towards the open door. Zero floated back just in time to avoid the sudden gust, but Jack wasn't as fast. The wind pulled Jack straight through the magical doorway into the swirling darkness. End of chapter 4. Please remember to like, share, comment, subscribe, and I'll see all of you in the next episode. Goodbye.